So welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time to be here. We have a rather small group this morning. And so I think I've met everyone, so you all know who I am. I don't know if you want to do a quick round of introductions. It's just a few of us.
That sounds like a good idea. I can go first. Hello, everyone. I'm Kyan. I used to be a very active member of this working group. The last couple of years, I've been working at Nali Bali, and so I sort of dropped out of the loop on it. But I've recently joined the DG Memory Trust, and I'll be a much more active participant going forward. So lovely all to meet you all. I'm the new ECD Resource Hub Manager with DGMT.
Thanks, Kyan. And just to mention that Kyan's going to be facilitating for us today. So thank you so much for making the time to do that.
Yeah, hi. My name is Peter Hagen. I'm with True North. I'm the Building and Infrastructure Environment section leader here. But I've also done quite a lot of work or led the project on our preschool registration color guide, and as a paper tool, and then also in the end development. That's how I kind of come to be here. And my colleague Lee is also here.
Hi, I'm Lee. I'm the project leader at True North, and I usually do attend the Western Cape CoP meetings.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm happy to be in the group again. Thank you.
Thanks. Good to see you both again.
Yeah.
Everyone, I'm Grant Titus from Inclusive Education, South Africa. I'm the M&E specialist within the organization. Our core focus is around ECD and ECD development. But my colleague couldn't make it, who would attend this forum specifically, so I'm standing in for.
Hi everyone, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Tandeka. So I'm here in Joburg. I'm from Bridge, ECD project manager from Bridge. Yeah, is there anyone else who still needs to be introduced?
Geraldine.
Okay.
Hi, Geraldine.
Hi everyone, I'm Geraldine from Rotary. We're hugely involved in ECD and we're looking forward to hearing the program discussions this morning. Good morning to all of you.
Thanks. Thanks, Geraldine, for being here this morning. Thank you all. So just to say once again, welcome to all of you. And I know our last meeting was held in May. So it's quite some time ago, and we haven't had one since then just because of the reopening of centers and the social that's been happening in the sector, that we just haven't had the time to convene. But we thought that as the year comes to a close, it's imperative that we just meet again to sort of debrief a bit on what has been happened the past few months, and then also to plan for next year. Carol, as you all know, has graciously been the facilitator for this CoP for about 1.5 years or 2 years now. But unfortunately, due to work commitments, she just cannot have it on her plate, and so she's no longer going to be facilitating, but still fully supports the CoP and will join when she can, of course. We do, however, have Kyan with us, who's just introduced himself, who will be facilitating today. And then we're also going to be joined by Peter Hagen, who will be sharing a bit about the app that they've built with True North. Yeah, so I'm sure it's going to be a good session. I think, and I'll hand over to Tandeka now, who will just explain the program for today. And yeah.
Thank you, Kotha, and thank you, colleagues.
Tandeka, sorry.
Yes, Greg?
Before you jump in, I just would like to let everyone know that we are recording. We would like to put this onto YouTube to share with people that weren't able to be at the meeting. However, if anyone does have any issues with that, would you please just let us know? Excuse me, sorry. so that I would be able to edit you out if you are unhappy with that. If you are happy with that, could you just please indicate with a reaction on your screen or something that you're okay? That's all I wanted to add. Sorry, Tandeka.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Craig. I hope everybody will be happy for us to record this meeting so that we're able to just share our conversation and any of the insights that come, from the conversations that we have today. Colleagues, I've put up on the screen the agenda for today's meeting. So CoP has just covered the welcome and the check-in. We'll just do some housekeeping just to kind of, explain, how the CoPs are going to be going on, or how the CoPs are going to be facilitated or conducted in the future. Kauta has already explained that Carol is no longer going to be facilitating the meetings for us anymore. And that's just really due to work pressures, and we had to understand it. We have had a really good journey with Carol, and she's held the CoPs very well, and we're very grateful to her organization, LRU, for allowing her the time and the space to get the Western Cape ECD CoPs going. And so hopefully colleagues will be able to also be able to continue and also to be able to grow our CoP membership and make it more meaningful. I've always said that I do appreciate the provincial CoPs because they tend to bring in, those on the ground insights, that we can bring into the National ECD CoP, that we can make available to the ECD sector in terms of learnings and, sharing knowledge. And so I'm not intimidated by, small numbers at all. In fact, I'm always encouraged when I'm in small CoPs. However, I think we will get to a point where we're able to grow our CoPs together. And I'm really looking forward to the meeting that we're going to be having today. And so I'm going to start off with some housekeeping, and then we're going to be discussing, the standard operating procedures and guidelines, just to have a sense of the reality on the ground. So if we remember correctly, colleagues, there's been some directions, that have been issued by the Minister of Department of Social Development, because of the COVID-19 situation and because of the Disaster Management Act, these directions had to be issued, but then they've had to be reissued because of a number of things that have taken place in the sector. So we're going to be discussing that, then, having some recommendations, hopefully from the Western Cape ECD CoP. We'll then have a showcase by True North, by Grant will be heading us up there. And then we will then have an update from the National ECD CoP, where we had a discussion, or we had a focus on ECD and the law. I think it was last week, Tuesday. And then we will just, determine dates and topics for next year. And then we will then close the meeting. So that is the agenda for the day, colleagues. I hope we all in line with it. I did send it yesterday. So if you will allow me, colleagues, I think I will stop sharing my screen now. So Kauta has mentioned already that Kayan is going to be joining us. We are very happy to have Kayan with us. Joining the meeting. He's joining the ECD CoP as our ECD facilitator. Kayan is very, well, I don't want to say well known, but he's had his part to play in the ECD sector, and I think even through the Bridge Western Cape ECD CoPs. He has been, assisting us in the past, and he's back. Myself and Kaufa did agree that, we would steal some of his time to facilitate the CoP, because we understood that, he does have a footprint, and he is a very good facilitator. So we're very happy that Kayan will be joining us. Kayan did mention that, you know, he was present and kind of lost touch when he started working at Nalibali, but he's back with us, and we're very happy to have Kayan with us. And so, colleagues, yeah, he will be facilitating the COPs, and it merges very well with some of the things that he's busy with at DGMT, which he will talk about. But yeah, we as Bridge are very happy to have Kayan with us, and I hope that the ECD CoP members in the Western Cape would also be very, you know, receptive of Kayan while he plays this role, and also support him, you know, as he tries to, you know, advance the ECD CoP and what we do in the ECD CoP. And so I'll hand over to Kayan so that he can introduce himself and just give us an overview of, you know, what he hopes to achieve through this role and the current role that he's playing at DGMT.
Thank you so much, Thandeka. Yeah, so thank you for that wonderful introduction, which, you know, very flattering. I'm very happy to be back involved with Bridge. I've always found these communities of practice to be incredibly generative. And yeah, the early childhood development community of practice in the Western Cape was a very, you know, productive and engaging community of practice in my experience. So I'm really happy to be able to assist in leading that. As Thandeka has already noted, there are synergies between this work and my formal work with DG Ameritrust. So as the ECD Resource Hub Manager, I'm tasked with helping to help to collect information and distribute it in meaningful ways. So one of the things we're going to be doing is putting together a website and engaging with forums like this in order to make sure that information that's required is visible throughout the sector. But also so that we can speak with a united voice, so that we can engage collectively on new forms of legislation. Yeah, so I'm very happy to be engaged with that. I know that it can always be a little bit tricky having a donor organization in the room. Just so you know, I personally don't make grants to any large organizations. I assist with supporting much smaller organizations. So I want people to feel comfortable to speak freely. I also know that the DG Ameritrust has a complex history within the ECD sector. And I'm also very happy to engage on that. If anybody feels uncomfortable, if anybody wants to raise any issues with me personally, I feel very happy to speak through that. But yeah, I feel, you know, we're in a very momentous moment within the sector, and we've seen a lot of pulling together, and I'm really looking forward to being part of that and helping to facilitate this network, really contribute to some of the important changes that we're seeing in the sector. Okay, should I move into the standard operating procedures conversation, Thandeka?
Let's move into the updates from members of the sector. Yes, thanks.
Cool. Yeah, so as you all know, that there's been a previous Bridge Community of Practice meeting, and then there've been a whole bunch of updates since then. So we organized this session really to give all the different members an opportunity to provide updates in terms of your work. Kotha, I know that you were going to talk us through this.
Yes, thanks, Kayan. So if you've been to our COPs before, everybody in the room just gets an opportunity to speak about what's been happening at the organization, or any other forum they're part of that they thought might be helpful to the group. So yeah, please go ahead. If there's anybody who'd like to share, now is your time. Yeah.
Okay. I don't see any hands unless anybody wants to unmute themselves. Okay, looks like we can proceed. Okay, so as Thandeka has already mentioned, one of the things we wanted to talk about today is the directions. So there was a set of directions that were released in July this year around reopening of ECD centres under the Disaster Management Act. Those directions were then, a new set of directions were issued on the 11th of September. And there are actually some alterations in those amended directions. The kind of story behind this process is that in the meantime, the Department of Social Development were taken to court, and their authority really to keep early childhood development centres closed was questioned, and the new directions were issued after that authority was basically taken away. So the idea is that the new directions were really supposed to be in compliance with the legal ruling. And so what I'm going to be walking through today is what do the updates to the amendments mean for the sector? So like under what conditions can early childhood development centres really reopen? What do we need to be considering? What is the sort of legal situation as it stands? What I'm going to be walking through is the update that's drawn from Van Wyk and Associates' review of the updated directions. They were the legal attorneys who took the Department of Social Development to court with SA Childcare and won that case. They've also recently won another case around non-payment of subsidies. Folks, I just want to make sure that my screen is being shown. I can't actually see what you guys can see. What is currently showing up on your screen?
Slides. Okay,
Your slides.
Okay, just the slides. Great. Cool.
We can see your screen if you, just put it in presenter mode. Thank you.
Great. Cool. Okay, so just checking everybody can see it in presenter mode. Is that all right?
Correct.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, and honestly, this is a conversation. We have 40 minutes. The idea here is that we walk through some of the updates and then we see if we want to achieve anything with this. Ideally, we might want, my thinking is that we might want to contribute a knowledge product based on what we discussed today. But yeah, please feel free to interrupt, ask any questions. I may not have the answers, but it may be useful as next steps in terms of where we go from here. Okay, so changes implied, and honestly, I know that I'm also not the only, well, I know that many of the experts on this are in the room, so please feel free to make any comments if I've gotten anything wrong. Okay, so as I just said, the directions which were issued on the 10th of July were replaced by new directions which were issued on the 11th of September, which means that in terms of the Disaster Management Act, what is currently in place are regulations on the 11th of September, as well as those that were issued on the 9th of May and the 2nd of July. Now, the directions that were issued on the 9th of May and the 2nd of July didn't pertain to early childhood development sectors, other than the fact that the 9th of May directions state that the Department of Social Development will continue to pay subsidies. So really, all that affects the department, that affects the early childhood development sector are the regulations that were issued on the 11th of September. Those should be seen as the core regulations, really, that in addition to the Children's Act and the standard regulations that would be in place in the sector, this is what's new. So in terms of sort of key takeaways that we see in the updated, what are they called now? Sorry, the updated directions. So basically, we have to, when early childhood development centres are reopening, it's important to confirm that reasonable steps have been taken in order to try and reopen safely. However, there is no sanction imposed for failure to take such reasonable steps, right? So we're still encouraging organisations to reopen under safe conditions, but there isn't any legal recourse that the department has should a centre not take those steps. Standard operating procedures have also gone away. The standard operating procedures were always questioned in terms of their legal legitimacy because they hadn't actually been promulgated officially. They'd sort of been issued by direction, and that was one of the main questions that was raised in the court case. But yeah, basically standard operating procedures don't seem to be on the Department of Social Development website anymore, and it's just not clear what legal force that they currently have within the sector. So in terms of updates, the updated directions have quite a bit of information around extramural activities. So extramural providers can operate at ECD centres, though within primary schools or any spaces that are controlled by other departments, those departments' regulations will then hold. However, there aren't any specific regulations around extramural activities. So the regulations that would be enforced would be the Department of Health and Department of Labor regulations that would then apply, and the usual protocols around public safety, including masks, social distancing, and sanitizing, would need to be in place for extramural programs. In the case that an extramural program is considered as part of an ECD program, then the 11th of September directions would then apply. So, in the case that it's sort of an ECD program that's being operated as an extramural activity, then both sets of directions may then apply. Cool. So in terms of visitors, the updated directions don't have anything specific around prohibiting visitors. Practically speaking, however, having visitors could be just practically challenging in terms of the screening requirements. But it is in theory possible to offer things like school tours if proper screening protocols are in place. In terms of inspections, so it was never really lawful for centres to be forced to wait for an inspection before they were allowed to open. So this was always, something which was of concern in the original directions that the sector was quite concerned about. It certainly has been the case that a lot of centres across the country have been informed that they had to wait for an inspection, either from the department or from a sort of I think in Western Cape, their social service organisations then would be doing that screening. That this isn't legally legitimate. However, it is still the case that the department are allowed to visit your centre. So they've always had the right to visit the centre as they did before COVID. It's just that centres don't have to wait for that to happen before they're allowed to reopen. You do not need to submit a self-assessment form. However, you do need to sign a confirmation in Annexure A, which is part of the updated directions. Okay, so basically, the Annexure A requires a declaration and confirmation of health and safety and social distancing measures set out in directions, standard operating procedures and guidelines and regulations made in terms of the Disaster Management Act. Lastly, in terms of registration, so one of the things that was of concern in the original directions was that that centres were sort of being required to indicate that they were going to attempt to register in order to reopen. So they didn't have to actually register in order to be allowed to reopen, but they had to commit to going to attempting to register, which I think was always an area of questionable validity, considering that a lot of centres are not unregistered through any fault of their own. And so, as one would expect, the registration issue has been removed in the latest directions, and the thing that we need to bear in mind is the only legislation that governs registration is the Children's Act. So yeah, any sort of calls for ECD centres to be required to commit to registration prior to reopening are now no longer in effect. Okay, so that is a whistle-stop tour of some of the updates in terms of the updated directions. Considering there's a lot of expertise in the room, I'd love to hear from the floor. I'd also love to hear what people have been communicating, because you guys are speaking more directly to ECD centres, and yeah, I'd love to hear what conversations have been happening and what's actually happening in practice at the moment.
Hi. Yeah, so from True North side, we are an SSO, so we've been taking a lot of direction from provincial DP. And so we did training with the principals on the standard operating procedures and how they should be in place to reopen. We encourage them to complete the readiness survey and that we would do verification, but they don't have to wait. As soon as they've done their readiness survey and they have their declaration up, they can open. And I think because we're an organization that's supporting them with PPE, with everything that's needed, all those preschools that wanted to reopen have reopened.
Can I
Thank you so much,
also
Jenny.
come in there, Kain?
Yep, Tandeka, please do.
Yeah, so this has been quite a challenge for some of our ECD CoP members, especially in the rural provinces. The last meeting that we had in Mpumalanga, my concern was, I mean, because we had the Department of Basic Education attending the meeting, the DSD couldn't make it to the meeting. However, they had actually communicated that they, had set up sort of like a steering committee between DBE and DSD at that time, where they were going through verification processes, right? And their plan was to verify every single ECD center, every single registered ECD center in the province. But the communication was strictly that you can't open until an official has visited your site, before you can reopen. And so people were very much, frustrated, because there, I think the Department of Basic Education is very present, very active as far as ECDs are concerned. But I think obviously it would be the registered ECD centers. And so there was a lot of frustration from our CoP members coming out saying, we waiting, we actually just sitting here literally waiting for DSD or whoever to come and say, now you can reopen. And even in KZN, there were a lot of our ECD partners who were just were afraid to reopen because they were actually waiting for someone to come and visit them and give that verification visit. And so I think it was quite, it was quite frustrating for many of our ECD CoP members. I mean, it became clear that, the main reason why a lot of ECD centers, particularly the unregistered ones, once we had done a survey with ECD practitioners for reopening, although the main reason for people not being able to reopen was tied to lack of funding, another reason was particularly these processes that people thought, were official processes that they had to go through before reopening, like verification. So yeah, that was our experience in Mpumalanga and KZN.
I think that's such an important point you raise, Tandeka. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I thought it might be worthwhile to go through this today. I think as Lee's already highlighted, it is one of the, as social service organizations or resource and training organizations, it's beholden on to us to try and support the sector to reopen as safely as possible. And so we are engaged in trying to toe the line between sort of onerous regulation and then also making sure that people don't reopen with no consideration of the dangerous conditions. But at the same time, it does seem like in specifically, it seems worse in provinces other than the Western Cape, from what I can tell. But there does seem to be a remarkable uncertainty in terms of what is expected, how people can reopen safely. And I think that's, for me, the value of trying to communicate, like, what is the current legal status quo. So I guess what I'm taking from what you're saying is, the NIDS-CRAM Wave 2 survey suggested that only 13% of children are currently in ECD centers, which is a very low proportion. We know that a lot of that's going to be the parents aren't able to afford fees, but we also know that quite a lot of centers, as you say, from the both waves of the survey suggested that they were waiting for information from the Department of Social Development about whether or not they could reopen. And I think the thing that we should probably be communicating consistently to the sector is that you are allowed to reopen, but that you need to reopen safely, and we need to be clear on what that means, what you can do in order to reopen in a reasonably safe fashion. So yeah, my feeling is that there's some work for us in terms of communications, in terms of advocacy. I think the law doesn't, ECD centers shouldn't be waiting for the department in order to reopen, but I can understand that a lot of people are feeling threatened or cowed, or that they might have their subsidies removed if they disobey the department. And so it's very understandable that there is this fear, and that a lot of centers, I guess, are put between a rock and a hard place. Anyway, I've just spoken a lot. Let me hand over again to others. I'd be interested to hear Grant and Margaret, what your experience on this is.
Okay, I'll come in there. Yeah, unfortunately, Kay and I have not been dealing with this aspect of the ECD challenge particularly. It's my colleague that really gets involved with that. But what we have, look, just to give you a bit of background, we are more of a capacitating entity where we build capacity with ECD practitioners with regards to inclusive education. And with the closure, we've adapted all our training to be online and interactive training sessions. So we've continued with the capacity building, even though practitioners haven't been able to put it into practice as such. And then part of our engagement with them has been around support with regards to, I won't say standard operating procedures, but compliance with the protocols for reopening, and providing education around that as well, because many of the centers, even the principals, have not been able to fully grasp what the requirements were and are for their reopening, and how they need to conduct themselves. But we didn't want to step out of our area of expertise. But as far as possible, we've really been trying to just support them and help them get in line, or then redirect them to the experts with like a True North with regards to them actually being fully compliant as well.
Thank you, Grant.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi, Kay, hi. My name is Margaret. Yeah, I head up the Home Choice Development Trust, and our main strategy is within early childhood development. Now, as a funder, I mean, we work with SSOs like True North, starting Chance and Fellaini area, and I must be honest with you, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be very bold, but our ECD centers, I mean, the communication from Department of Social Development and also the process that they needed to follow was not that easy. So if it wasn't for our NGOs and our SSOs, I mean, the picture would have looked much different in the Western Cape area. So we were lucky in a sense that we do have SSOs like True North, and we have NGOs that literally broke down this complicated process for the NGOs, and they also did fundraising in order for them to, you know, get compliant with all the protocols that they need to meet, and the sanitizers and all those kind of things, because if you cost it out, it was quite an expensive process. I mean, it cost anything between 3.5 to 5,000 rand for a center to open, and if they didn't have income for 6-7 months, I mean, where other could they get it other than, you know, the NGO that operates in that area? And for me, myself, I mean, I went through the, as it was sent out from Department of Social Development, and it wasn't the easy process to understand and unpack. So yeah, we're very grateful having organizations like True North, Starting Chance, Learning and Reach, who have done this for the, you know, for the ECD centers to make it easier for them. And there was a definite lack from, you know, Department of Social Development in this area. Yeah, that's what I have to say.
And you know, I haven't engaged directly with the department. But my understanding is that even though they're, you know, in terms of the regulations that came down from national department were quite onerous, I think that in the Western Cape there was more of an effort to translate that to the SSOs and support that process. I'm not sure, Lee, if you would agree with that. But yeah, my sense is that the Western Cape had a slightly better experience, as you say, Margaret, because of the
much better.
Board of NGO network.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think you're right. I think you're right in saying that, and I think that what it does show is this, since the Western Cape is the only area that's working with SSOs, it's this time has shown that how valuable that actually is. Mainly because we get to ask the questions to the department that are being asked to us. So what's happening in other provinces is governments just dictating as they do, and then no one gets to ask the questions on behalf of the people as regularly as we're able to as SSOs. So I think that the Western Cape is doing way better than any other province from what I've noticed and heard from other provinces. But also what was so tricky is, you know, the DSD wanted to provide PPE funds to the schools, but it was so linked to that online readiness survey and ticking that box, being registered in the next 6 months. So it wasn't like I'll make every effort to be registered. It was be registered in the next 6 months, which is, it's like such a hard thing to ask of an unregistered preschool.
Yeah, no, completely. And implies that the unregistered preschool is unregistered because of their faults, not because of, you know, onerous regulation or, yeah, I guess challenges with the registration process. I completely agree, Lee. Koliswa, I'm not sure if you want to come in. No pressure if you wouldn't like to, but I'd also, yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Okay. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, so let's move on from that. So I guess, you know, a question for me oh, yeah.
Grant has had his hand up for so long.
Oh, sorry, Grant, if I've missed your hand, apologies. Please come in.
I think that one of the biggest issues for me is that I don't disagree, for example, with the department wanting to legalize, if I can put it that way, or register all of these institutions so that they, you know, we can make sure that our children are getting the correct foundation from the correct people. But they are setting the goalposts so far, and that is one of the biggest issues. Then secondly, two issues that I have is the fact that they themselves as a department do not have the capacity to bring these people on board or these institutions on board or up to speed. And so I'm almost assuming that there's a reliance on SSOs and NGOs like ourselves to build the capacity and help these institutions get to where they need to be. But they're not making any funding available in order for that to happen as well. So there's a strong reliance on corporate funding for this. However, there isn't a communication either between government and corporate to say, listen, here is a need. Will you look at or re-look at some of your corporate social investment, so to speak, to say, how can you support this initiative on our behalf? Which again then brings an integration between government and corporate. But there isn't that kind of forum or understanding or even initiative that is put in place. So they really shift the goalpost for those who potentially want to get there, but cannot get there. And what we've done in some of the rural areas, for example, where there are schools who are, I want to say, affiliated with ECD centers, where the ECD is almost a feeder to the school, is to then turn around and say, okay, fine, where there is no SSO in that environment, can you as a school step in and assist? And even gone as far as saying where they potentially have funds or were able to assist in raising funds for those ECD centers to become compliant and then register, there has been that kind of relationship that has been initiated in some areas. But the process of that registration, as the ladies have been saying, it is so cumbersome. It's almost like we asking you to register, but we don't really want you to register. You know, they haven't simplified this thing. And I'm not saying simplify from a point of cutting corners. I'm talking about from just the process. So there's a lot of frustration within the industry. Thank you.
I completely agree, Grant, and I think you're actually previewing a conversation that Tendeka and I will be facilitating before the close of the meeting. Just
I
around.
Apologize for that.
No, don't. I guess what you're doing is you're highlighting the importance of it, yeah, just to note that is something that we'll get into a little bit about what opportunities there are at the moment in terms of influencing, as you say, the onerous registration requirements, the lack of state support, those important issues that you've just noted. I see one question on the chat. What informed making that link between, providing PPE and registration? Sorry, not...
Yeah, Grant, that was me. So I think someone mentioned that, you know, the department was willing to provide assistance with PPE, but then they had said that the providers, the ECD providers, would then have to sign something to say that they would register, you know, within the next 6 months. So I'm just trying to understand why did the provincial DSD decide to do that? If anyone.
Lee, are you able to come in on that? Do you know any more?
Yeah, so when we met with the department, they said that in the Western Cape, they wanted to work with the SSOs to distribute the PPE funds, and there were certain requirements of the schools, the preschools, that we could actually give those funds to. And the one requirement was that those schools have completed the online readiness survey and that they've ticked the box to say that they'll be ready in the next 6 months. And then the other one was that they have a bank account in their school's name, not in their personal name. And yeah, so I think what they were trying to say is that we can give funds to unregistered schools, but only if they've ticked that box to say that they're going to be compliant in the next 6 months, which I just think is really unfair. Yeah, because if you're unregistered, it's quite hard, especially in this time where city officials who need to come out and do checks, and even that process is held up during this time anyway, and then to put that requirement on. So it was from DSD. Does that answer the question?
Tendeka?
Yes, Lee, that answers the question. Thank you.
Sorry, Karen, I just want to come in here. There was also during, I can't remember which month that was, but during this whole process, I mean, the department came out with a 1.3 billion rand that's going to be put forward to police ECD centers instead of equipping them. I mean, that was a hard shot for our ECDs, you know, to get in this time, because there was no support, and all of a sudden there's funds available, but in terms of policing rather than to equip them and to get them open. I mean, I still don't know what the outcome of all of that was.
I can give you an update on that. I don't know if folks are aware, but there was this campaign that was organized, and I was supporting in terms of helping to coordinate that. It was called the Save Our ECD Workforce campaign, where we were sort of leveraging the concern around that. The latest is that campaign, they sort of, in a sense, declared victory, because the president's announcement, not last Thursday, but the Thursday before, indicated that I think it's around 500 million rand would be used to support the sector in terms of an ECD continuity grant for ECD practitioners to support them over a 6 month period starting in October, ending in March next year. That amounts to around 83,000 practitioners who will be receiving 750 rand a month which is not expected to be full salary replacement, but it's the government's contribution towards salary replacement during a time when many ECD practitioners are being retrenched or being forced to work at incredibly low rates. So that it's not that, I think the minister, there was probably some political concern around, like, including the youth in the workforce. And I think the outrage in that was deserved. We seem to have influenced government into a more positive path. I think there is still something around supporting young people to be involved in the sector, but this is less as a compliance monitor and more as a supporter of the actual centre's current functioning. But I guess my point is that we've seen some improvements there. But just to add to Lee's point about, the PPE being linked to the registration, I think probably part of that isn't visible to the public is that there's quite a limited amount of money that was put into that PPE fund. I can't remember the exact number, but it was, I think 14 million or something in that region.
4 million.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Thandeka. And if you think about the number of ECD centers and what PPE costs, I don't think that it was sufficient. And I think, government were probably worried about misspend. One of the major concerns that's been happening in the background in this whole conversation is that there's been a lot of corruption with the other state distribution, funding distribution, and people have been concerned about the control of funding and how that works within the sector. So I think that's also part of the conversation in the background. I also see your question, Thandeka, about how long have SSOs been operating in the Western Cape. Lee's better placed than I am. My understanding is from 2018, but Lee, please add if I missed something, if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's right, Kayan. Yeah, 2018. And it hasn't been an easy journey by any means, but I think a worthwhile journey so far.
Yeah,
Thanks, Lee.
It definitely sounds like it is, and it definitely, well, in my mind, would be something beneficial if other provinces could at least try, to replicate it. Yeah.
I certainly. It might be worthwhile trying to put together a knowledge product on that, or even doing a short presentation at a national CoP sometime. My feeling is that because the Western Cape are leading in this, there's sort of politically been the sense that, a DA-led province isn't necessarily looked politically favorably on in other provinces. So just in terms of the ANC adopting a model that the Western Cape have pioneered, there's political concern around that. But I do think that, partly because of the very strong civil society sector in the Western Cape, but also partly because of the way that the department has been including civil society in that process, there certainly have been some significant wins in that process, as Lee's articulated. Folks, so we've got 8 more minutes in the session, and I want to make sure that we just tie these threads together a little bit, because I found this conversation very interesting and I'm appreciating all the inputs. I wanted to ask, is it worthwhile us trying to put together anything based on this? My sense is that, we've identified that there are still challenges in other parts of the country, particularly on awareness of the legislation, but I'm not sure if we perceive that to be a major concern within the Western Cape. Yeah, and I guess what I'm just wondering is, would it be worthwhile for us to do something that adds to like the Bridge knowledge product database? Would it be worthwhile for us to, put together some communication? I want to know if there's like an end point that we should be working towards, or if we think things are sufficient as they are.
I want to respond, Kayan, but I think maybe I must wait for the other participants.
Thanks, Thandeka. Would anybody like to come in on that?
Hi. Maybe you can just give more clarity on what you mean in terms of a knowledge product and on which issue in particular, for us who have not been to Bridge CoP before.
Sure. So honestly, yeah, and it was a bit vague. So the kind of thing. So let me back up. I think that communities of practice can be incredibly generative in terms of helping to develop sort of streams of action, let me call it that way. When we identify problems, I really appreciate the information sharing and the learning that happens in these communities of practice. I think sometimes it can be nice if we sort of see small wins coming from that information sharing. It doesn't always have to happen. I'm not trying to say that we need to generate something, but if there is a synergy between something that we identify as an issue and something that we can do to resolve it, then I think that's a worthwhile effort. So the kind of thing that I was thinking is, for example, I put together this presentation in terms of changes in the regulation. Is this something that we want to communicate, for example, in the Western Cape, so that ECD centers understand the latest situation? Is there currently a communication barrier, or are centers in the Western Cape able to reopen without misinformation around that process? I'm not saying that we would need to circulate the presentation as is. We might, for example, want somebody like Elizabeth van Beek, who put together the update on the regulations, to sort of be a little bit more considered in terms of what we circulate. But because we have access to kind of the latest information, and because we are able to circulate that information within a network, one of the things we could do is that. Yeah, but there might be other things that people would suggest as well.
I think it would be a brilliant idea because the schools received the first SOP and directives, and then the second one came out, and I'm pretty sure most of them didn't bother to read through it and pick apart all the different changes. Even myself personally, I was overwhelmed by going, oh, do we need to read another document and try and figure this out? So the fact that the work's already been done, it would be really useful just to send it out what those changes are, so that organizations and SSOs can just send it on to the principals in a simple format. Would be excellent.
Hi, my name is Koliswa. I think communication barriers is the most difficult thing to the centers or the practitioners. And then it will be a nice thing to circulate the whole thing, but make sure it, as she's just said, it's to make it very easy to understand for them, because some of them, they are working in these centers, but they're not well trained, or maybe I don't know how to say it, but I think that will be a good idea, but in a very easy way to understand. Thanks.
Completely agreed, Koliswa and also Lee. Kandek, would you like to come in?
Yeah. So I mean, I really like the idea of having to communicate these changes, because like Lee said, I think probably with the second directions, I mean, our practitioners might not even know, till today. And I think it might even be dire in other provinces, besides the Western Cape. My only concern, Kayan, is sometimes I feel like really we know that the onus should be on government to be able to communicate these kind of things, especially if it's directions that are coming from them, But I think we all understand the issues and the complications in terms of being able to include government or request that a simple communique like this come from government in terms of capacity and, those issues. So I would like to see a situation where communication like this comes directly from like the Department of Social Development, and it's something that can be sent like a circular, nationally, so that everybody in the provinces can be included. And I think for me, my major concern is that, in many of the other provinces, centers are not reopening because people are they're just overwhelmed by the thought of engaging this process that looks, so onerous. So I think for me, it would be worth it if we could also try and see, you know, the possibility. And I think we could arrange for something like that through, you know, the steering committee. I think it's something that they would like. If we were to write to them and say, you know, as the Western Cape ECD CoP, you know, these are the things that we've discovered in terms of, you know, the differences about, from the from the directions in July and the ones in September. You know, we think that we could easily communicate what these changes are to the entire sector. You know, we can draft this for the for the National Social Development, so that they can actually share this with everyone. You know, can even put their name on it, is fine, as long as people get to have this communication. So I guess for me, it's a matter of, you know, I share everybody's sentiments, but I think it would be great if we could share it with everybody else. You know.
Totally agreed, and I think you're raising something that's very important. Is, you know, longer term, should we be excluding the department in our processing? Because we really do need to kind of build towards a more cohesive sector. I guess the only thing to think about is that somebody like Elizabeth van Wyk, you know, is comfortable being a bit antagonistic in terms of her framing of these issues. For example, saying that ECD centers, you know, there isn't any like legal repercussion for an ECD center reopening without, you know, for example, obeying the SoPs strictly. I imagine that the department would want different framing on some of those issues, but I think that's probably small haggling that we could work out. So in terms of the next step, just so that we have these down, am I hearing, one, that we should probably engage directly with, you know, we should maybe write a letter, and I'm happy to do that on behalf of the Western Cape Community of Practice, asking if we could get some more consolidated, the articulation of the changes between the directions in July and the directions in September, so that we can communicate that nationally. Suggesting that we could, for example, offer to craft some of what we've observed as some of those changes are, and then we can actually share that with them and then see what they would change and remove. If that doesn't go forward, because I do think it's possible that the department may not want to do that, then we can always use our own platforms and consolidate this information and share it within our own platforms, you know, we don't require the department's approval to do that. But it would probably be first prize if the department did do that. Would that make sense, Thandeka?
Yes, I think that would be, yeah, that's a sensible way of doing it. We approach them first. If something doesn't work out, then we can see what we do on our own. But yeah, that's Wonderful. My thinking. Not sure what everybody else thinks.
So maybe, because we do have people on the screen, if you're happy with the suggested way forward, you can do a little emote. Otherwise, you can stick a suggestion in chat if you have any other ideas. I want to try and draw the session to a close because we are just over time now. But I'd love to just check if we're agreed on this as the way forward before we do that.
Can I add something? Is that I agree it's definitely a worthwhile thing. My only concern is time, because engaging with especially national takes a lot of time, and in that time there's centers waiting to reopen because they think they need verification. So we just need to be aware of that as well.
Very good point, Lee. So maybe Thandeka, just between you and me, because I agreed that I don't mind constructing the original letter. I know that you have, we can talk about who we will send it to and how, but we should probably try to get something out within a month, if that makes sense, because yeah, I think this is a good, the urgency is important. Thank you for raising that, Lee.
Agree.
Folks, if you wouldn't mind just indicating agreement either in chat or with an emote. Hello, Sally.
Hello.
Okay, thank you. Cool. I am seeing agreement. Great, wonderful. I think we're agreed on that, and then we can move forward onto the next item on the agenda, which is, sorry, just busy pulling up the agenda again. Next item on the agenda is the showcase from True North. Peter, let me quickly introduce Peter. Thank you so much for for agreeing to do this, Peter. Okay, so Peter has originally studied IT before studying environmental science at UCT. He's had courses in business management through UNISA and worked in the business world between 2006 and 2013, and then joined True North in 2014, which I think when you guys were established, is in the role of the infrastructure and environment leader. And yeah, has basically been managing a number of minor building projects and also supported the organization through improving their M&E system. And he's the lead of the PRCG development, which is the app that the True North have recently released. So Peter, would you mind coming in?
Yeah, thank you, Ken. And thank you to everybody for having me here today. It's really awesome to have the opportunity to present. I'm going to switch onto my presentation. So hopefully it goes smoothly, and if you can't hear me, just shout. Okay, so basically today, part of with our app we've developed, it kind of fits a bigger story, and I think it's important just to give it the context before I go into the app, which is actually quite a simple tool. So just an overview about us is we're an SSO, a social service organization based here in Vrygrond and Overcome, which is near Muizenberg. Communities have about a population of 45,000 people with about 5,000 children under the age of 5. And we work with the preschools of the community, training, supporting, equipping them, and connecting them to opportunities. We started with a 7-year research phase. It was just one of my directors, Vicky Kum, who was here and kind of got to know the community and what the needs were, especially in the ECD sector. And then we started implementation. We've done a lot of training, started doing major builds and minor builds. I thank Home Choice Development Trust who's here for their part in that as well. And then we're going to the next 7 years of sort of handover to the community. So we're beginning that process from next year. So that we saw this tools we're developing now as part of the handover process. We can hand the community something that they can work with beyond us directly being on the ground here. So the preschool registration color guide actually falls into our Rainbow Development Framework, which is intended to give a clear development plan for preschools, and so they understand what's needed to reach not just registration, but being sustainable, being offering quality education. And the intention of the program is to be replicable and scalable. So while we sort of piloting it here in Vrygrond as we're developing, we haven't quite finished the development of it yet, but we're working towards that point. We're also trying to make sure that it can be reproduced elsewhere, and that's once again where our app comes in. And it works around both heart and smart aspects. So it's not just, you can be academically very good at something, but as a leader, you need to also have heart in about what you do. And so we try and holistically develop the leaders of the community, the preschool leaders. And the rainbow part of the name comes from the representation, diversity, and also we've used it to color band schools, which I'll go into a bit later. But the Rainbow Development Framework is quite a lot more we could share. It possibly might be a good thing to share one day as a session just on its own. So our areas under the Rainbow Development Framework is illegally registered preschools, and that's where our preschool registration color guide falls into. It's the legal side. But as I said, we also do holistic leadership development, financial sustainability, ECD provision, quality program, and we'd also try and we're getting schools to give back to their community. So we're trying to measure that as well, where principals teach other principals and mentor principals. So we're keeping, getting a community where skills are being given back by people who've received them from training and such. And then grade R readiness is a key factor as well. So we want to see children who exit school, preschools, ready for primary school and a life of learning. So our M&E tools we've used, we've gone through good old paper-based log sheets. We still use them for visits to schools. We used Map Our RDF, and it's to also enable the schools to support each other. And as I said, we've got the paper-based log sheets. We've then used Google Forms for data capture, and we've had Excel spreadsheets. And for a long time, our PRCG was a paper-based tool. We would score them manually at the centers, and we'd use it to understand how far they're developing in terms of legality. But as we came along, we kind of realized the tool had additional value if it could be shared further and if we could automate the process. And at this point, I'd like to say thank you to the Home Choice Development Trust, they're one of several funders who funded the app, but they've really played a major role in getting this app off the ground in this community with us. So thank you to them. So our preschool registration color guide is currently a tool of 121 questions, and it covers requirements, registration requirements, DSD registration requirements, legal requirements. We try and make it clear it's not a government tool in the sense that the data isn't submitted to government. It's what we understand of government regulations, which is often quite difficult for a school to understand without somebody pulling it all together for them. Health department has a whole set of requirements, fire's got a set, DSD's got requirements, and a school doesn't always understand where it's standing in terms of legality. Even so, basically, if the school's using the app or our preschool registration color guide, if getting 100% on it doesn't mean they get registered. They still have to do their official part with submitting certificates to the relevant officials, portfolio evidence, DSD, and the SSOs here in the Western Cape help them with that process. But as we worked with our questionnaires, we realized that preschools could lead this data collection for themselves. They can lead, it empowers them to know where they're at in terms of legality. And if they can set realistic goals and they can see themselves achieving it, they will be motivated more to progress. So keys of this app as we developed is to help the principal understand the development that was required to meet registration. And they can then lead the pace of their development. Obviously, it's a legal requirement for them to be registered, and we hope they'll work through as a pace that is achievable, that they can get to registration sooner rather than later. But at the same time, we feel they need to control their development journey, and so they're not pressurized to answer everything immediately within a certain time frame, but they are encouraged to do so. So our app helps them set their own goals, and it tracks issues by color band, which I'll go into in a second. Also, we built in functionality so they can share their reports. So they can print a report at any point they wish, download the PDF on their phone, also send it to an email account, where they can see exactly where they're at. And once they've done a year or two of surveys, they can start to see how they're improving year on year, or where they're maybe failing year on year, areas where they can focus their work on. But I'll show you more of that in a minute. But also what's useful for SSOs or even funders of theirs, they can share their report and show how they're actually working towards something. And even with the ECD forums in the community, if they're well set up, they could share their data to show areas where they maybe need development, or maybe areas where resources are needed. So the ECD forum could then help coordinate resources for a community if necessary. So functionality-wise, it's a very simple questionnaire. We've tried to simplify the wording of each question, so it should be easy to understand for most people. We do obviously have an issue with language. We have only done the first version of the app in English, so that's something where we need to look at in future. The app remembers where a person has left off, so they can work on a couple of questions, even if they just want to do one or two and then stop and do something else. They can also select categories to work on, say building, if they want to work on the building section, or active learning. And as I said before, the report charts, it generates a report behind the scenes that they have access to, and it organizes everything by blue, green, and yellow, which I'll talk about in a second. Preschools also said they've got the power to share their reports with others via email, WhatsApp, whichever method they'd like. And the app, beyond the initial download, can work offline, although to generate reports and such things, they'll need to have internet connectivity. But they can see on app how they're doing without internet connectivity. And we try to develop the app to be really small, so it doesn't have a big hit for people who've got limited data. And then on the back end of the app, we've got an area where I can update the questions remotely. So if we find certain questions are not being easily understood, we can reword them, we can add questions, and we can remove questions if they're no longer applicable. So that takes very little time and is very simple to do. And it will automatically update on the app on the people's tablets or cell phones when they next have internet connectivity. We also have addendums in the app. So certain questions, we don't have addendums for all questions, but certain questions, if somebody needs more information, they don't understand the question, they can click on it and it will give them extra information. In terms of the reports, it also sorts all their answers, their no answers, things they've still got to work on in terms of blue, green, and yellow. So blue focusing on basic health and safety issues, which will be easy and relatively easy and cost effective to achieve. So they can maybe focus on getting blue done before they move on to green, which can be a little bit more complex and possibly slightly more costly as well, and might take longer. Training courses might not be available, and they need to find people who can offer them. And then yellow looks at most of the legal infrastructure requirements, which may be costly, especially if it comes to a major build. Teacher qualifications can take a year or so, maybe a year and a half for level 5s. So it's more complex things to achieve. So we wouldn't want a school to be, or principal to be discouraged by trying to do yellow questions first, while they can actually get some easier wins working their way up through blue, green, and then into yellow. At this point, I'm going to show you a little video. I hope it comes through clearly. So yeah, that's a very brief run through of the app and actually as it works. As you can see, it's pretty simple for people to use, and it's available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. It's a first version. There's quite a few ideas that we've had and also people put forward for future. One area we do need to work on is addendums, adding more information. And if you were to use the app and you see something that's missing and you feel it'll be valuable, please drop us an email. At some point, I believe further language inclusion will be really valuable because English is widely spoken, but in many communities, people may only speak Xhosa or Afrikaans or Zulu. And we want to really help the principal with this to work to control their own journey towards registration, be aware of what's required, and without local language, that might make it challenging. But as I said, this is the first version. We're getting off the ground. There's other ideas around regional adaptations. So right now, we've based this a lot on our experience in the Western Cape, and we've tried to make it generic for South Africa, but in some areas there may be little differences. And there's even possibilities across Africa where it could be developed into slightly different app assessing schools, maybe not looking at particular bylaws, but looking at broader things. We will see quite a lot of value with, as more people use the app, that anonymized statistics by region could be quite valuable. The main thing is with the app is we want principals to feel encouraged to use it, so we wouldn't be sharing personal information, which school got what score, etc. It's we kind of feel very strongly about protecting privacy, and the other thing is we don't have a way, and we don't, from our side, we don't expect to validate the data. We'd hope that the school, one, is honest, but secondly, if they are sharing with the SSO to assist them on their development journey, the SSO could verify the data that they have presented to the SSO. So they should be more prepared for inspections, for people visiting, and they've got information behind it. And also, I mean, if we do develop the app further, it would be something we'd have to look at with financial support. It wasn't hectic costs, but it also did cost a fair bit, and we're very fortunate to have a few funders, including Home Choice, who's here today, supporting us in that development of the app to this first version. I will share links to the app on the chat if people are interested, and just give it a shot. If you want to do a test sign in, that's not a problem. And if anybody's got any questions, I'm happy to help.
Thank you, Peter. That was a really informative presentation. I actually did download the app before the meeting, and I just didn't want to sign in to create false data, but it's good to know that we can do that. Yeah, you've answered all of my questions. I think I have one more, but I want to just open the floor for questions in general. Yeah, would anybody like to come in? Okay, while waiting for any other questions from the floor, my question really is in terms of the rollout. I mean, I appreciate you really answered my one question around regional adaptations. I think that was really useful insight. In terms of how you're imagining this app will be rolled out, what currently is in process, my understanding from what you said about SSOs is that you're hoping that NGOs potentially help to facilitate the use of the app with communities across South Africa potentially. What would you imagine that would look like?
Yeah, that would be, I think, the best, or one of the ways of getting it out there. So we haven't thought about doing a radio or television campaign or something, or newspapers. But it is something we may look at from a marketing point of view of doing more widely. At the moment, it's kind of was launched, we launched last month. We did a launch, we invited the SSOs, we invited quite a few officials as well from government. There has been an uptick in usage of the app. It's still got a long way to go. It's starting to take off. But we really hope that schools and ECD forums may start to use it and then refer others based on their experience. And yeah, I would see NGOs, the role that they could play, and SSOs is encouraging their schools to sign up. But obviously nobody is under any obligation to use it. And yeah, we're just lucky we can make it available freely to people. So it's not, other than the data cost of downloading it, it's not a heavy toll in terms of data. So we hope people give it a shot. And I think the NGOs and SSO route would be, it's our first way of trying to get it out there. After which we'll look at other communication strategies if necessary.
No, I think that's useful, and I'm certainly something. And Geraldine has asked, is it freely available? And I believe the answer to that is yes. Totally, yeah. Are you marketing to NGOs, DSD via Debbie Dreyer? That's a question from Geraldine.
I have not. I don't know Debbie Dreyer, but I could, if Geraldine can send me some details, that might be a good idea.
Wonderful. And something that I'm wondering is, we're going to be taking the notes from this meeting, and you've already got a video. If we'd be able to use that as well as a part of so anybody who would like to know more, that would be great.
The videos on our website under the PRCG section, which I can give a link to. And actually, one thing I should add about the app, just so it doesn't cause confusion out there, I know government is looking at possibly apps or surveys to look from a top-down point of view to help to monitor schools' progress. And this is intended to be so schools are prepared. So there's space for both kinds of approach, so that basically this helps schools be prepared for the questions they may be asked.
I think what would be quite helpful is if we start to map out what electronic resources exist, because I think this app is excellent. I know that Smart Start are also working on similar things. I know that with the Vangasali campaign, the Department of Social Development have started a foray into electronic media. So it'd be great to start to map what exists and the purposes of each of these systems so that we can, I guess really as technology starts to make its way through the ECD sectors, we can start to clarify what exists and what serves what purposes. But yeah, I think it's a wonderful presentation and really exciting that you guys have managed to launch this.
Thank you, appreciate you.
Oops, sorry, Peter.
No, I just appreciate that you gave us the platform to introduce it. And I do agree about mapping. I think mapping is going to be important so there's not duplication areas.
And then, Tandeka, that might be something that we could think about with Bridge, but yeah, we can talk about that offline. Okay, I want to bring that to a close because I don't see any additional questions. Thank you so much for that presentation, Peter. Next section, we're going to be talking about the update from the ECD National Community of Practice, which was on early childhood development in the law. Tandeka, would you like to lead us through that?
Sure, Kai, but I just see that Geraldine just posed a question.
Oh, sorry, Geraldine. Apologies if I missed that.
Yeah, on the chat.
Sure. So Geraldine said, regarding the app, given ECD is supposed to be moving to DBE, perhaps worth taking at least the Western Cape Department of Education, although their initial aim will focus on teacher training. Peter, do you have any response to that?
We haven't given that thought, but it's a good point. So yes, there will be a time we'll have to talk to the Department of Education about it.
Yeah, increasingly we're going to have to figure that one out, but thank you for raising that, Geraldine.
Thanks.
Okay, Tandeka, would you like to lead us through the next section?
Okay, thank you, Kayan. Hi, colleagues, it's me again. So we thought we should share a summary of the National ECD CoP, just to give you, just a brief overview of what we spoke about at the CoP, and just some outcomes that we think are relevant for the CoP. So I'm going to go through, very briefly, because I can't speak from an informed position about the presentations that were made on the day. They were made by experts. So I'm just going to go through, what they were communicating to us, and then Kayan is going to come in at the very last bit, where we talk about, a campaign that was shared at the ECD CoP. So yeah, we like Kayan mentioned. Let me just share my screen because cool. Is it sharing? Can everybody see it?
I can see it, Tandeka. Yeah, we can see it.
All right.
It's not in presentation mode, but we can still see. It's okay, I wouldn't worry about it. I think we can see clearly enough. Perfect.
Okay, so we had a CoP on ECD and the law, as Kayan mentioned, sort of just to get this topic, to the CoP, to our CoP members. The law can be a very intimidating terrain. It's quite complex. It's not easily understood by, by most of us. And so we decided to facilitate this CoP that would allow our members to interact with the law in order to understand it and how it affects their work, understand processes and mechanisms available to the ECD sector in influencing the law to better serve them. And lastly, because we thought, it would help to strengthen and advance active citizenship within the sector, which we all need to be if we're going to make any changes within our sector. And ultimately, if there are going to be any changes, they have to be made within the legal framework. I think Kayan had mentioned, just some of the issues or the frustrations that we keep on talking about, as far as things like registration, which have been, issues that the sector has been grappling with for such a long time. I think ultimately, if we want to be able to see those changes, then we as a sector have to kind of force or, strengthen our voice regarding those changes within the legal framework. So we had Lizette Berry from the Children's Institute give us, background issues on the Children's Act, what has been historical barriers, that the Children's Act has presented to the ECD sector. And she spoke to issues around registration again, the dual requirements, registering of partial care as well as an ECD program. She spoke about, issues around, poor recognition or differentiation of program modalities, and that, our Children's Act doesn't necessarily accommodate different modes like toy library programs, parenting programs, which in the South African context are quite relevant because, we can't all, unfortunately, we can't all have, ECD programs running from, traditional brick and mortar buildings. She also spoke about, poor recognition of, context. So the issue of, failure to apply power to assist and conditional registration, and that there are mechanisms that are there within the Children's Act that are pro-poor, that are supposed to help the ECD sector to be able to, make ECD services accessible. But these are applied quite poorly by provincial departments. And so ultimately what we have is, we have an act that kind of perpetuates inequality. And so this was what Lizette Berry had, communicated mainly to the ECD CoP on that day. Then we had Norina Ali, who is, I understand, a lecturer at the University of Cape Town currently, speak to us about the Children's Amendment Act. And so Norina explained that there's currently a bill that DSD has passed to Parliament. And then this bill is up for consideration from the 19th of October until the 27th of October. The ECD sector will be able to make public comments. She then explained that, the critical issue around the bill is that it introduces a new part on ECD centers. So it retains the distinction between partial care and ECD programs, but it also introduces a new part that is entirely dedicated to ECD centers. Sorry about that. So I guess what she was communicating, colleagues, and Kayan, you'll help me out here if I'm struggling, was that the introduction of this new part on ECD centers does then make issues potentially worse for the ECD sector. It brings a whole host of issues to registration, norms and standards, infrastructure, the power to assist, as well as conditional registration. And in addition, there's that big gap in that the amendment bill does not in any way accommodate the issue of the function shift in any way. And so we know that there's supposed to be a function shift from the Department of Social Development to the DBE, but none of this is, accommodated in the bill. And so as far as registration involved, there seems that there will most likely now be a triple process now with ECD centers being introduced as a part on their own. There's still no accommodation of different modes of ECD programs. The norms and standards, it means that there will be more duplication. And then infrastructure, there'll be there's most likely might be no support to private properties that are not owned by NPOs. So there might be no infrastructure support to ECD centers that are running from private homes and things like that, or from private properties or businesses. And then assistance would now be made discretionary and narrowed down. So my understanding with this is that whereas with the Children's Act, the power to provinces had to assist, but with the bill, it might be a discretionary decision. And so essentially there might be a whole lot of complications that now will be introduced for the ECD sector that will further or deepen the inequalities that we know are currently existing in terms of being able to provide this access to the ECD programs of ECD service providers, and ultimately children who are most in need of these services. And then lastly, we had a presentation by Tess Peacock. Tess is representing a number of organizations who had actually come together to think of a campaign, that could run at this opportune moment where there are submissions that are supposed to be received with regards to this bill. And with that campaign, really try to garner the support of the ECD sector and get them behind this process, where they would ultimately be able to, submit, what they think about the bill and the changes that they would like to see within the legislative framework for ECD. And she then explained, that, the campaign would be, built around 5 reforms that had been identified. And these are the 5 reforms that she spoke about at the COP. And I guess the purpose with Tessa's presentation was really to have the ECD CoP members, comment, make recommendations, show support around these. And yeah, colleagues, so that's exactly what happened on that day. I'm going to hand over to Kayan just to speak more towards these 5 reforms, as well as the campaign that was launched at that day at the National ECD CoP.
Thank you, Thandeka, and thank you for doing such an excellent job of summarizing, 3 incredibly detailed presentations. I think basically, probably some context that's useful in understanding this is that the Children's Amendment Bill, it doesn't seem like it was drafted with a very clear understanding of what the core challenges in the sector are, despite the fact that the sector have been lobbying for around particular issues for around 10 years. It doesn't seem that it was clear when the bill was being written what the specific issues were. So we see things, for example, like the potential for triple registration being introduced, probably not intentionally, probably almost as people trying to build out a separate section for early childhood development, but not realizing that they've duplicated issues that were touched on elsewhere in the legislation. So I think the core message that we want people to get from this is that on the one hand, the proposed amendments are a missed opportunity. There is so much opportunity to improve the legislation in the Children's Act. We really want the sector to have much better processes around early childhood development. And on the other hand, there is actually the introduction of things that could potentially make it even worse. So on the one hand, the status quo isn't great, and this is an opportunity to improve it. But on the other hand, there are even some issues in this current legislation which even exacerbate previously existing issues. And so this is really an opportunity for us as a sector to come together around making these improvements, because currently this legislation is moving through Parliament, and we have an opportunity to make submissions in order to improve the legislation. And then next year in February and March, we'll have the opportunity to do presentations to Parliament in order to basically highlight the concerns that we have. What we're hoping for is, in the short term, we're hoping to see iterative improvements in the legislation, but in the longer term, we really hope that these 5 wins that Thandeka has on the screen will be, what we'll start to see coming through in any new updates and any early childhood development legislation. So we're not expecting that all of the things that we are that we're asking for are going to necessarily be in the final updates, but we are hoping to get some incremental wins. So basically, just so everybody knows, I'm somewhat involved in the coordination of the Real Reform for Early Childhood Development campaign, which Thandeka has just spoken to. There's a link in the chat if anybody wants to click on it. You can go view our website. What we want to do is in this, before the 27th of November, we're hoping that we can get over 200 submissions to Parliament on the bill. The way that Parliament works is that they tabulate the number of people who are concerned about a particular area of the bill. And so the more submissions we make, the more likely it is that they'll consider the concerns that the sector has. We try to galvanize people around 5 core reforms that we're particularly asking for. but honestly, anybody can make a submission and you can highlight any area of concern. We will be providing draft template submissions so that anybody who feels a bit uncomfortable making a submission to Parliament has an example, has something they can edit to improve, something that's really the starting point to making a submission. And we will have an officer who will be able to support you with making a submission if you're interested. That those template submissions aren't yet available, but if you sign up on our website, we will get them to you the moment that they are. Yeah, so basically in this phase of the campaign, we're really just calling on people to sign the petition, make a template submission. What's the third thing that you can do? There's a third thing. Yeah, I guess just join our campaign. Like if you support, if you share these concerns with the legislation, you can sign up to be a member on the campaign. We're going to be electing a steering committee so that it's a sort of a democratic representative working group. At the moment, it's been organized by organizations that have an awareness of this legislative process, and some have been reading the legislation, but it will be more sort of transparently elected going forward. And yeah, you can sign on. Your organization's logo can be represented. Yeah, we're really looking for support. At the moment, we had on last count, I think over 68 organizations across the country, everything from grassroots organizations to large national organizations all signed on in support. And really, we'd love to have as many people as possible involved. So I think that's a good summary.
Yeah.
Any questions? Cool. I'm not seeing any questions from the floor. Grant, this was something you raised earlier. I hope this helps to address some of your questions. Just so everyone's clear, one of the things we're looking for is a one-stop registration process, which Grant had sort of alluded to. And the other issue is also simpler and adequate health and safety program standards, which is also something Grant spoke to. And then lastly, we were calling for the infrastructure needs of the sector to be supported. There's this thing in the legislation called the power to assist. And we're calling on government to actually make use of the power to assist, really to in a pro-poor way, actually resource ECD provision much more intentionally. More clarity around conditional registration. You can see the 5 key reforms on the website, but I think they speak to some of the issues Grant has already raised. So Grant, if inclusive education want to sign on and support, we'd love to have you. Okay, I don't see any questions from the floor. If there are any, please put them in chat or raise your hand or just unmute yourself and we will give you the floor. But if nothing comes through, we can then move on to the final section of our agenda, which is, basically we wanted to talk about next year, what next year is going to look like in terms of dates and topics. And Kotha is going to lead us through that process. Kotha, would you like to come in?
Thanks, Kaya. So the idea of the section is just to plan a bit for next year and get a good sense of what the members would like to speak about. I think it's important as a COP to make sure that our COPs are member-centric. So we're hoping that members would suggest some topics. So if you'd like to either just put it in the chat or just let us know if you'd like to speak about it. If you have any suggestions for topics, please send that through to us. And then in the meantime, Kyan, I just wanted to suggest some dates for next year. So we meet 4 times a year, and if there's a need, we can do an extra meeting, as we did this year with COVID and the closure of centers. But ideally we'll meet 4 times a year, and what we usually did was we met on a Thursday in the 3rd week of the month, every, I think, 8 to 10 weeks, or 8 to 12 weeks actually. And the other thing that we usually did was meeting in the afternoon, just so that we can include practitioners who are working at the centers in the morning. I just wanted to know from the people in the room if an afternoon session works better or morning sessions. The afternoon sessions start at about 2 p.m. So usually when we had it at a venue, people could come a bit earlier and then leave by 4, just before 4 o'clock to miss the traffic. So if I could get like a thumbs up on the idea of an afternoon session, we feel that it just includes more practitioners from the sector. So if everybody's okay with that, we'll keep it at, thanks Sally. So we'll keep it at, we'll discuss this and send a communication out for the proposed dates, but the ones we have at the moment are the 21st of January, so it's all on a Thursday afternoon, the 22nd of April, the 22nd of July, and the last one on the 21st of October. So feel free to pencil that in, but we will send a communication to everyone on the database with those proposed dates. I'm not sure if any topics have come through on the chat, Kayan.
No topics as of yet.
Okay.
If anybody wants to raise a topic. One topic that we'd sort of been discussing, and I know that it's been one that's been raised before, is potentially to talk about the function shift. We could even see if it's possible to get somebody from government to come in. I can't promise that because I think it can sometimes be difficult to pin people down, although Lee, if you know somebody from the Western Cape Department, we might be able to use that network. But yeah, one potential idea for next year would be the function shift, but others would really be useful.
That was a planned topic for this year, and we just didn't get to it because of the circumstances. So I think from gathered from what we discussed last year, I think perhaps we should table that as a possible discussion for next year. But if nobody wants to mention any topics that come up right now, please feel free to send us an email. I'll pop my email in the chat, and you have Tandeka's email. Yeah, so like I said, we just really want to make it as member-centric as possible. The other thing I wanted to discuss, was there a question?
Sorry, it's me, Lee. I just wonder if the SALI campaign might be worth talking about.
Sorry, Lee, which campaign?
Bangasali.
That's a great idea. Let's add that as a potential topic. I haven't heard any feedback in terms of the results of that campaign, how many people were registered. Maybe we can get somebody from the Nelson Mandela Institute who are intimately involved in that.
I'm currently working on it.
Oh, wonderful.
Hopefully. Yeah, I'm working on bringing DSD, but it would be then a National ECD CoP, just to give us an information session on Bangasali, but I can't promise anything as well. So, but definitely yes.
Okay, that sounds good. The other suggestion I wanted to make was since our CoPs are usually hosted by Elru, and Carol has mentioned we're always welcome. But an idea that has come up with our Western Cape M&E CoP is to rotate the CoPs for every CoP or every second CoP. So the idea is that an individual organization would host the CoP. Obviously, if it takes place online, you just get some time to talk about your organization. So for instance, if True North were to host it, no pressure, True North. You just have some time to just talk about what you do and in your community, what you do. And yeah, so that would just be the idea of hosting the CoP. And if you'd like to facilitate the CoP or somebody in your organization to facilitate the CoP, you're also welcome to do so. Once again, the idea is just to make sure that everybody feels that it's not Kayan's CoP or, you know, so the idea is just to have everybody rotate, and it gives everyone a nice side, it gives you sort of an experiential learning opportunity, I think, for CoP members who perhaps are not in the ECD sector, or for people like Margaret, who is perhaps works in one particular community. It'd be nice for her to see some other things. So yeah, that's also an idea. So if you are keen to host a CoP, you can just drop me a line and we can just chat a bit more about how that works.
Thank you, Kotha. And you know, something that we should be aware of is that we will be in the short term continuing them online, but you know, we'll continue to have conversations about when we go back to physical communities of practice. If we do, I mean, I assume that that's still something that we would like to eventually move towards. So thank you for leading us through that section. I can see that our attendance is fluctuating, so I think perhaps that's a sign that we should be moving towards wrapping up. I want to make sure that, oh, wonderful to see Zarina joining. Zarina and I have a history of attending communities of practice together. Hello. So something just, we want to make sure that we have everybody's email address to make sure that people stay on the mailing list going forward. So if you haven't attended one of these before, please stick your email address in the chat, and then we'll make sure we add you to the mailing list for future communities of practice. If you're already on the mailing list, then don't need to worry about that. I think something that we're busy figuring out internally is that, you know, there are people on the national communities of practice mailing list, and there are people on the provincial communities of practice mailing list. And so sometimes you might end up getting emails for one of those, but not the other. But yeah, we'll try and figure that out. And if you're interested in this particular community of practice, just let us know, and we'll keep forwarding you the emails. Okay, is there anything else that needs to be raised before we close? Any other comments or suggestions? We will, of course, circulate the minutes of this meeting and any sort of information that we can share about the Real Reform for ECD campaign, and as well as the True North Colour app. Any other points that need to be raised before we close?
I'm good.
Thank you, Tandeka. Okay, then I think we should probably draw the meeting to a close. We really appreciate you guys all being here. I'm really excited to be well, with Bridge and with all of you being able to support this community of practice going forward. We do have some agenda items and some action items we'll be taking forward from this conversation. Kotha's put forward the potential COP dates in the chat. In case if you want to know when we're looking at from next year, this will be the last community of practice for this year. So we'll be picking up in January next year again. Okay, yeah, I think with no further ado, we can draw the meeting to a close. Thank you all. It's been lovely chatting with you.